Restaurants and romance, empire and opera, fun, surprising experiences at every one of the more than 300 stops on the metro. My name is Lisa. I'm a writer and tour guide. I carry a Canadian passport, but all we'll need is a ticket for the metro system as I show you historic, inspirational, endlessly fabulous Paris. I'd like to share my love for this spectacular city with you, one stop after the next, by way of the exciting Paris metro system. So grab your French phrasebook and put on your walking shoes. We're going to Paris. Next stop, Invalides. Today, we're walking into the heart of Paris politics and history. Welcome to Invalides. We'll see the residence built by Sun King Louis XIV for his wounded soldiers and the site of Napoleon's tomb. We'll go underground to see the famous sewers and above ground to a gorgeous bridge and an interesting American church. This neighborhood is also the home of the French National Assembly, so restaurants here cater to politicians. And supervising it all is the thinker in Rodin's extraordinary museum. Welcome to Invalides. This neighborhood is mostly known for its government offices and important, impressive residences, but it's a wonderful place to come to see several really important museums. The obvious place to start is right here at the Hôtel des Invalides with its golden dome, one of the main landmarks of the Paris skyline. The metro station Invalides is named for the magnificent museum behind me. Louis XIV built the Baroque building in order to house his wounded war veterans from the innumerable battles fought during his reign. That's where the name comes from, Invalides, the invalids who lived here. This building project was the largest taken on by Louis XIV after Versailles. The important building features Louis XIV as king on a horse as you go in, and all the upper windows are surrounded by armor, which now refers nicely to the incredible armor collection in the museum, but originally it was a reference to the battles that the veterans who lived here had survived. When Louis XIV built the Hôtel des Invalides, the veterans of his armies were miserable. Often too badly injured to work, many survived by begging on the streets. The king felt pushed by shame and public demand to house the veterans of his many wars. Finished in 1674, the building housed a hospital, 2 churches, and workshops for shoemaking, tapestries, calligraphy, and lighting so veterans could work. The Hôtel wasn't a hotel, but it was a long-term residence. Soon, nearly 4,000 people lived here, with military and religious discipline that weren't always to everyone's liking. But at least here, veterans were fed, housed, and had access to medical care, which was very radical for the time. Invalides still serves the same purpose today. There's a leading medical institution attached to the Ministry of Defense and Veterans Affairs that specializes in those wounded in war. Invalides is closely associated with 2 of the best-known leaders in French history. First, Louis XIV, the Sun King who built this facility, and then Napoleon, who began his career as a brilliant military leader. Napoleon made the church into a military pantheon by making this the final resting place of Turenne, a French marshal. L'Église du Dôme is one of the most spectacular religious buildings in the capital. It's easy to spot the Golden Dome from observation points across the city. Renovated in 1989 during the bicentennial of the French Revolution, they used 550,000 leaves of 24-karat gold to restore its luster. This is one of the most visited places in Paris because this is where you'll find the tomb of Napoleon I. Before his death, Napoleon said, "I want my ashes to rest on the banks of the Seine amidst the French people I love so much." The emperor died on the island of St. Helena in 1821, and 19 years later, in 1840, after much discussion, he was finally repatriated to Paris and given a state funeral. Since then, his body has been here in a red stone tomb in this crypt in l'Église du Dôme. Napoleon began as an artillery officer, but he had a genius for administration. He himself believed that his civil code, still in use, was his most important accomplishment. In the gallery surrounding his tomb, a series of carvings detail his most important achievements. Called the Little Corporal for his diminutive height, Napoleon was an outsized figure in European history, and he continues to fascinate visitors today. All through the Invalides, you will see cannons lined up. Now, these are not fake or replica cannons. These are from actual wars dating back centuries that have been used by the French or captured by the French. Some of the cannons have graffiti from different wars and centuries. Some of the cannons also have damage from the battles they were in. Now, each cannon has its own name and story. This is the Misanthrope. It was created in 1842, and it was used in various battles, including one in 1870, where it was damaged. You actually have cannon damage, probably from the Prussians, given the battle, here. And they've got the mark, the name of the battle, and the date when the bombing occurred carved into the cannon. Cannons are expensive. You don't get rid of one just because it's damaged, so they kept using it. Now, some of the other cannons here are even more elaborate because they're from earlier centuries when they treated cannons rather like sculpture. They were so expensive to produce, you made them beautiful and worthy of the king. Now, this is l'Arpenteur. It's 100 years earlier from the other cannon. It's from 1742, and it's much more elaborate. It's also twice as heavy as the later cannons. As they got better at developing the cannons, they made them more streamlined and lighter. This cannon is especially lovely because of its dolphins here. It has crests. It also has the image of how the cannons were transported to get them to the battle. It's actually quite an amazing cannon if you're interested in them as sculpture. The Army Museum has more than just cannons. When you visit, you'll have a chance to survey more than 300,000 objects illustrating the art of war since the Middle Ages. The collection includes all kinds of weaponry, but also photos, archival footage, uniforms, and models of battlefields. My favorite section of the museum is devoted to the time of Napoleon, showing various personal items belonging to him. Even his horse is here, stuffed, along with Napoleon's pistols and the coat and hat he wore during his exile on St. Helena. The two world wars of the 20th century occupy an essential place in the museum, an important stop for World War buffs. This is a chance to discover many photos and rare archival footage that offer a different perspective. In addition to its collection, the Army Museum also regularly presents special events like concerts, film screenings, lectures, and activities for younger audiences. A great way to learn about the history of the world, even if the museum is dedicated to its bloodiest times. There's one important secret about this Musée de l'Armée, and that is in the summer, if it's hot in Paris, this is one of the few museums that has excellent air conditioning. So it's a good getaway after you've been touring around the neighborhood and you've looked at lots of important buildings and you're a little tired and a little sweaty. Come in here, look at the military relief maps and so on, and just cool off. A visit to the Hôtel des Invalides isn't limited to the museum. Like all important buildings built at the time of Louis XIV, it's surrounded by open spaces designed to emphasize its impressiveness. Behind me is the Esplanade of the Invalides, a lovely green space which has been filled temporarily with buildings during universal exhibitions in the 19th century. These days, though, it's mostly used by kids playing frisbee and soccer, especially on the hot days of summer. After you visit the Invalides, you can take a stroll through the gardens which surround the museum. They're filled with all kinds of geometric topiary. In the 17th century, the French garden was much more than an art. It was a science. Louis XIV was obsessed with gardens, as you'll see if you visit his palace at Versailles. Those palace grounds were designed by Le Notre, and it's this man's genius which influenced French gardens throughout the ages. The Jardin de l'Intendant here features classic paths that wind between lawns and topiary, trees trimmed into geometric shapes. You'll find the statue of Jules Hardouin Mansart, the first architect for Louis XIV. Mansart completed work on the Church of the Invalides, a project initially designed by another architect. Mansart is remembered for his mansard roof, as well as for his designs of famous buildings, including the Grand Trianon at the Château of Versailles. This is Parole Portée, a more contemporary sculpture, a fountain by Nicolas Alquin. Appropriate for the Invalides, this is dedicated to the memory of all victims of terrorism, whether on French soil or anywhere else on the planet. Now, across from the gardens and surrounded by cannons, come with me to an interesting place to eat right after this. Welcome back to unexpected, exciting Paris. We're visiting the city around its metro stations, and today we're exploring Invalides, a neighborhood of history and politics. Here we are at Café de l'Esplanade, marvelously located beside the Invalides. Now, what I like about this cafe is that it serves food all through the day. You can pop in for something at breakfast time. I'm here at brunch between the morning and lunch rushes because I want something light to get me going for the day. Now, you can also come here and order foie gras and oysters and just go to town on a huge meal. So you really have all kinds of options here. Merci. I have a salmon omelet. The salmon is inside the omelet, I'm assuming, because I can't see it right now. And potatoes, and of course bread and butter. And I love the fact that in France, when you order a Perrier, it usually comes with its own little lemon slice. Very classy. This is a fun place to pause because the decorator of the restaurant picked up on the theme of Invalides. Jacques Garcia has done the decor for a lot of restaurants in Paris. He's very chic as a designer. And what he did for the interior is he's got all of these cannonball replicas as lighting fixtures and cannons as pillars. So you really get this theme of the Invalides. And whenever you look out the window, you're looking at the real cannons of Invalides. So it's kind of wonderful. Now, if we walk up the esplanade of Invalides, we're at the banks of the River Seine. The quays here beside me until recently had a highway running down them. However, the left bank quays here in Paris are protected under the UNESCO heritage sites, so they needed to be renovated and restored. And soon there will be gardens here, performance spaces, and areas to relax where you can enjoy views up and down the Seine. For centuries, the Seine was accessible to all Parisians. It was the essential working river of the city, with riverboats unloading produce, pleasure boats, and even bathhouses. But in 1967, French President Georges Pompidou turned the riverbank into highways. Fortunately, today, the riverbanks are being taken back so the people of Paris can enjoy them once again. The Invalides is on the left bank of the Seine. The city has always been closely associated, even defined, by its beautiful river. But the Seine snakes its way across the French landscape. So over the centuries, Parisians have come to talk about the left bank or the right bank based on the direction the river is flowing towards the Atlantic. And here on the left bank at the Quai d'Orsay, we're just above a different kind of water issue in Paris. Follow me. Welcome to the sewers of Paris. There are tunnels under here that date back to Napoleon I. It's a vast system that can actually be visited today, and it's quite interesting because you find out all kinds of details about the history of the city and how this big metropolis actually functions today. This is an early sewer cleaning machine. This one's from the beginning of the 20th century. You have to imagine them bringing it down into the sewers, opening it up, all this water and sewage on this side. It's weighted down so the whole thing doesn't tip over on this poor sewer worker. And in order to clean the sewer, what they do is they lever up this trapdoor to let a tiny high-pressure jet of water shoot down the sewer to clean it, because you have to repeatedly clean the sewers of Paris. You can imagine what gets stuck in these. So you let the water out, bring it a little further down, do the whole thing again to keep cleaning the sewer. Now what's interesting about this noise, which is, imagine it echoing down these tunnels, all the rocks that are stuck in the sewer system jangling against this hard metal. The noise reminded the men in the early 20th century of a machine gun, because most of them had been through World War I. This terrible clanking, it made them think of the rattling noise of a machine gun, so they nicknamed this machine the mitrailleuse, the machine gun. Imagine working in sewers this big, human-sized, just large enough for a person to get down and clean the sewers and work, but really not great for someone claustrophobic like me. Now, in the sewers, not only do you obviously have the sewage, but the sewers of Paris are crucial because they also bring all the drinking water to every building in Paris, and it's here where the telephone lines are. So all those cables all across the city, they're also in the sewer tunnels, as are the electrical cables that control the traffic lights that Parisians tend to ignore. But, you know, they're here in the sewers. Now, every sewer tunnel, some of them are a lot bigger than this, but a lot of them are small. Each one is labeled for the street it's beneath, in case you get lost, so you'll know where you are. Imagine the entire plan of Paris, all these beautiful streets. Beneath each one, there's a sewer. Napoleon III hired Baron Haussmann to renovate the city of Paris, and one of the key things to implement in the plan was an entirely new sewer system to update, enlarge, and overall modernize the way sewage was treated in the city. It was, in fact, so revolutionary that people came from all over the continent to visit the Haussmann sewers. Behind me is one of the boats they used to use to clean the sewers, the large collector sewers, which are almost like canals underneath the city of Paris. Now, in the 1920s, people actually paid to go on sewer tours where they sat in these boats and were dragged along the sewers by sewer workers on the quays pulling chains. I cannot imagine doing that tour, but people actually paid money to go there. This narrow sewer behind me is a good example of what's under many of the streets in Paris. Each building in the city has a connection to these sewers, and if you lose some jewelry, say a wedding ring, down the drain, you can call the city of Paris, and they will send a sewer employee to open the trap that connects from the building into the sewer, and they will probably find your ring. They use these balls to clean the smaller sewers. The smallest ones use hollow wooden balls, which actually can come apart so they can fit them into the awkward spaces for the sewers. The water pressure pushes them along and it cleans the sewers out. They also have the large iron balls for the larger tunnels. Now, Parisians, like a lot of people, throw all kinds of things into the sewer system, including on one memorable occasion, a tiny baby alligator that somebody flushed down the toilet. In 1984, the sewer workers found the alligator. He'd grown a little bit bigger, and he was still healthy. They gave him to the Paris Zoo, where he went on to have a long and much more enjoyable life.
Let's leave the underworld now and step back into the sunlight. We'll walk over to my favorite bridge in all of Paris, the glittering Alexander III Bridge, right after this. We're in glittering, gorgeous Paris, exploring the area around the Invalides. Parisian bridges across the River Seine are true works of art, and this one is actually a 19th century agreement between France and Imperial Russia.
This is the Alexander III Bridge. It was initially begun in 1896, and the first stone was laid by Alexander III's son, Nicholas II.
The bridge is ornamented with Russian influences. The lamps are replicas of those that light the famous Trinity Bridge in St. Petersburg, and the statues at the center of the arch are the nymphs of the Neva River, which flows through the Russian city.
The bridge was completed in 1900 in time for one of the international exhibitions. Everyone flocked to see the bridge because of its single span crossing the Seine, which was an engineering feat for the time.
The tall statues installed on blocks at either end act as counterweight for the bridge. On the right bank, the statues represent science and art. On the left bank, commerce and industry.
The bridge is one of the most popular places for wedding photos in Paris, especially because if you line it up just right, you get the beautiful sculptures of the bridge and the Eiffel Tower in the background. It's a little bit ironic that there's a bridge testifying to French-Russian allegiance facing the burial space of Napoleon, considering that Napoleon waged war against Russia, invaded the country, and eventually lost that battle.
Certainly, the emperor would not have appreciated the bridge. But over time, international relations change and countries sign new agreements. This area is the political heart of Paris, and we can walk from the Russian-influenced bridge to the interesting American church in Paris, a place I visited often when I was first getting settled in the French capital. Today, I have an appointment with Pastor Scott.
Hey, I'm Lisa. Nice to meet you.
I'm Scott, Lisa. Welcome to the American Church.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to seeing more of it.
The church started in 1814, but this actual facility was started I think in 1926 and finished in 1931. The vision was that we want to have a monument both to honor God, but also honor the importance of Franco-American relations, that we've always been good friends over the centuries, really. Yeah. And so we wanted to, I think the Americans had the vision, the foresight to build an edifice that had some grandeur and showed honor to the French as well. You know, we wanted to contribute something beautiful to this city.
The American Church is also an open community center offering educational, cultural, and social services. There are support groups for refugees, sports facilities, and a popular free bulletin board advertising housing, jobs, and everything a newcomer to Paris might need.
Is it mostly Americans in your congregation and in your community, or what's the breakup?
It used to be, Lisa, but right now we have about 40 or 50 different nationalities, obviously from around the world. So visually, this place is packed on a Sunday. We have 3 services, but you know, whether it's the traditional or the really contemporary, you know, bring your earplugs, kind of rockin' contemporary worship, it's very international. And so it looks like the UN. I love that about this community. This is very unique in that you're going to have, not too many Protestant churches are going to have Pope John the 23rd, who is a reformer in Vatican II, John Wesley, who is reformer of the Anglican Church, the Apostle Paul, reformer of Judaism, Martin Luther, German reformer, yeah, and Jean Calvin, the French reformer.
Right.
As well as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the Baptist reformer,
That's
who preached in this pulpit in 1965, yes. And that's very humbling for any preacher who knows that, to get up there and speak where Dr. King preached.
The board!
Just to bring back memories to you, yeah.
Little furnished studio, yep, that would be
That's
me,
it.
basically.
A lot of students, a lot of au pairs, people that are...
Recruiting for English teachers, yeah.
A lot of apartments and jobs that people are looking for advertised here.
Thanks so much for the tour, Scott. Really appreciate it.
You're very welcome, Lisa. Glad you could stop by, and
My pleasure.
hope we'll see you again soon.
Yeah, hopefully for a concert. Sure.
Now that we've visited the first established American church outside the United States, let's drop by a Canadian institution just a few blocks away.
This is the Canadian Cultural Centre, which opened in 1970 in a rather nice old private mansion overlooking the Esplanade of Invalides. Here it was open to foster cultural exchange between France and Canada, and every month there's a nice selection of exhibitions, film screenings, and readings, open to the public and often free.
Parisians tend to imagine Canada as a place buried in snowdrifts 10 feet high, with all kinds of wild animals and red uniformed mounted police riding around on horseback. So this cultural center corrects some of those assumptions. In addition to the exhibitions and events presented here, there are different features such as information sessions, a large research center, and a kiosk for those in France who wish to study in Canada. Now, if you follow me along behind the Esplanade of Invalides, I'll take you to one of my favorite gardens in Paris with the works of the great sculptor Rodin right after this. We're exploring the area surrounding Paris subway stations, and today we're at Invalides. This neighborhood is crucial for French politics, and several major government offices are here. We'll start at number 37 on the Quai d'Orsay. This building dates back to the mid-19th century and houses the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This is where the major decisions for foreign policy of France are made, and where foreign diplomats are welcomed when visiting Paris. And next, let's look at the center for French politics.
If you're a French politician, this building is extremely important to you because this is the main entrance for the National Assembly, the main French House of Parliament.
The National Assembly is installed in the Palais Bourbon, which takes its name from the Duchess of Bourbon, the daughter of Louis XIV and his mistress, Madame de Montespan. Over the years, the building has undergone many renovations, particularly with the facade, which was rebuilt during the reign of Napoleon to match the Greco-Roman appearance of the Church of the Madeleine across the river near Place de la Concorde. The National Assembly has been home to the French government since 1798.
You can actually go see the politicians do what they do by visiting the National Assembly in session. You have to get your ticket in advance, though, either online through their website or by phoning.
A parliamentary session can be very quiet like this one, or extremely hectic. It all depends on the agenda and the topics being discussed. If you decide to observe French political life up close, you should know that the rules are really strict. You must remain silent at all times as a member of the public, and you must refrain from intervening in any way. Otherwise, you'll be escorted out by security guards. But if you can behave yourself, you can take the opportunity to admire a beautiful room that has witnessed the history of France since the late 18th century. For a really original souvenir of your trip to France, there's a shop at the National Assembly where you can buy a bust of Marianne, the symbol of the French Republic, or flags, cockades and pens, books, baby accessories, and of course gloves, potholders, and socks marked with left or right. This concept of left or right parties dates back to the French Revolution. During meetings, the pro-monarchy deputies were seated at the right of the chairman, while the progressive pro-people MPs sat on his left. This division still exists in parliamentary systems around the world today.
Behind Invalides is the wide Avenue Breteuil, beautiful walk down, and if we go there, we'll discover some really interesting monuments. This is a wonderful statue of Louis Pasteur, put up in 1908. He actually lived not far from here. Pasteur, of course, is famous for pasteurization. The statue is wonderful because it features pastoral scenes with cows. Milk, of course, is one of the things that Louis Pasteur changed forever, extending our life expectancies. This monument commemorates 4 local personalities, one medallion for each of them on every side. We're starting with Valentin Rouille, who actually started the first Institute for the Blind. He's also important because it was one of his students, Louis Braille, who invented Braille, allowing the blind to read. The next man of science commemorated on the sculpture is Eugène Bouchu. Now, this doctor worked in the nearby children's hospital, and he invented the process of intubation, essential for modern surgery. Around here, we have another man of science. The name of the square is Georges Mulot, after Louis-Georges Mulot, who actually discovered the first artesian well by drilling here in Paris in 1841. There's actually a fountain just below his medallion. And the 4th person on this memorial is a little bit unusual. The fourth person on this monument is actually a woman, Rosa Bonheur. She's not a man of science, she's actually an artist. She was a painter who won the Légion d'honneur. She was also incredibly knowledgeable about anatomy. She won the right to wear men's clothes so she could go to the slaughterhouses and draw animal anatomy. So she's appropriate for this monument, not only in that she was interested in the way things worked, and she's from this neighborhood, which is what this monument is commemorating. So the fourth person is actually a painter.
Now let's stay in the artistic mindset and visit the Rue de Varennes to see the work of incredible sculptor Auguste Rodin.
Starting in 1908, Rodin would come in from his home in the suburbs every morning and spend the day here, drawing in his studio space. Originally, it was an hôtel particulier that was crumbling and used by a number of artists as their studios. Gradually, though, the city evicted all the artists except for Rodin, who negotiated slowly and finally won the right to have the building turned into a museum dedicated to his own work.
All the work exhibited in the garden of the Hôtel Biron displays the genius of this artist who revolutionized the world of sculpture in the 19th century. Rodin stepped away from the neoclassical tradition of the time. Instead, he focused on emotional interpretation, sculpting the human body into expressive gestures and flowing lines. It's hard to believe that at the beginning, Rodin struggled very hard. After failing the entrance examination to the École des Beaux-Arts 3 times, he embarked on various paid construction projects, including the Paris Opera and the Commodity Exchange in Brussels. Over the years, he exhibited his personal works, but was rejected widely because his style was too innovative for the time. In 1875, at the age of 35, he fulfilled a dream by visiting Italy and experiencing its artistic treasures. The works of Michelangelo ultimately had a significant impact on the rest of his career. Inspired by his trip, he created the statue L'Homme Errant. This statue triggered a controversy because it was too perfect, and Rodin was accused of having cast his model. After this, Rodin never again perfectly represented the human body and focused on expressive movement. Rodin now is famous not only in France but around the world. His sculptures for La Porte d'Enfer, or The Gates of Hell, is a work that took him several years. Inspired by Dante's Divine Comedy, it has more than 200 figures that were reproduced individually in various formats. This, the final version, was cast in bronze after Rodin's death. Multiple copies exist in California, Switzerland, and Japan. Among Rodin's works that are most widely reproduced, it's probably The Thinker that you remember most. You're probably already familiar with the statue of the naked man deep in thought about the fate of the universe. The original model was created in 1880 and measures only 28 inches tall, but the garden's main version is life-size. Each of the sculptures exhibited here bears the mark of its creator, a man who had extraordinary talent and sensitivity, which he brought to bear on the art of sculpture, reproducing not only the human shape, but the full range of our emotion and expression.
The Musée Rodin is located on Rue Varennes. So after you visit the museum, it's well worth strolling down Varennes to look at the facades of some really beautiful historical mansions. This 300-year-old mansion was the site of the most spectacular party of the 19th century. 3,000 guests were invited to revel here. However, these days, it's much more serious because the Hôtel Matignon is actually the official office of the country's prime minister. 56 Rue de Varennes is one of my favorite buildings on this street, partly because of the beautiful shell above the entranceway, and also because surrealist poet Louis Aragon lived here in the latter part of his life with his muse Elsa, and they both spent hours writing in this building, which seems incredibly romantic to me. American writer Edith Wharton was the first woman to win the Pulitzer Prize. She wrote The Age of Innocence, among other novels, and she spent a lot of her life in France. Some of her happiest years were here in Paris, living in this apartment.
Even though I've been living in Paris for years, there's one traditional Parisian thing I've never tried: spending an afternoon fishing on the banks of the Seine. And near the Metro Invalides, there's a shop specializing in fishing gear, right after this. We're in Paris, a city built around a beautiful river, and the Seine has many fish and fishermen.
Welcome to Des Poissons Si Grands, a shop devoted to fishing right in the center of Paris. Now, I thought the title of the shop referred to the old fisherman's saga of, oh, I caught a fish so big, so big. But actually, Des Poissons Si Grands is a much more poetic name. It's the title of a book written by a resistance fighter, and it's also a biblical reference. The owner of the shop hopes that Des Poissons Si Grands is the kind of title that makes people want to dream. In fact, the shop has all kinds of fabulous souvenirs if you're passing by, and it has every possible thing you could possibly need to go fishing anywhere in the world. A lot of the fishing lures actually come from Japan, and they're arranged in this shop rather the way they would be in Japan, i.e. in very careful organization that doesn't take up much space. So we've got a couple of different layers here. 1, 2 layers of lures. There's even a 3rd layer right at the back for every possible lure you might want to need in your fishing trip. Because a lot of the clientele that comes to Des Poissons Si Grands is actually looking for equipment for their holiday sports fishing event. So the French have a reputation of being a little bit obsessive, and they like to come here to get exactly the perfect thing. And in fact, there's a joke here that the French are very precise, whereas North Americans tend to be a little more relaxed about fishing. They go fishing with, a cooler, their family. They go to have a good time. The French, however, might spend 3 days shopping and preparing and researching for about 10 minutes of actual fishing. They're both good positions to take, people here believe, but they're a little different. I, on the other hand, want to know about fishing in Paris. Actually, fishing in Paris these days is called street fishing. You can go fishing in the Seine or in the canals. And that's what interests me. One of the people who works here, Hugo, used to do competitive fishing in this, so I'm going to get him to help me out. Hugo? Salut. En fait, bonjour. Je cherche tout l'équipement pour aller pêcher dans le canal, s'il vous plaît.
Pas de souci. On va commencer par les câbles.
Okay.
The first step, find the right fishing rod.
This one weighs almost nothing. It would be perfect for the canal. It would be easy to carry there as well.
Then find the right reel to buy.
Nice. Super smooth. Okay. Very nice. I've only ever fished with really beaten up fishing rods belonging to older cousins, so this is very spectacular. Okay.
And to attract the fish, we need the right lure. The tricky thing is choosing the right one.
Okay. Actually, if I'm going to be fishing in Paris, I have 2 options for what will really make the fish happy. One could be quite a neutral lure, one of these colors, kind of a nice rainy Paris day color. Or I could go for something really flashy like this, which the fish might really go for because he's having kind of a slow, gray, Paris-y day, and all of a sudden there's this bright orange neon thing, so he might want that. Interesting choice. Now, if you don't feel like packing up an entire fishing rod and lure setup to take home with you, you can get a wonderful, small, easy-to-pack souvenir like a corkscrew or a knife from the old French company La Heule here. They're quite beautiful knives. La Heule is a wonderful knife. It's one of the most famous brands and one of the oldest knife makers in France. They always have this bee on them, and it's a fabulous souvenir because of the corkscrew. And you always need a corkscrew, right? And it's the perfect thing whenever you open a bottle of wine. When you're back at home, you'll think, this fabulous fish shop right near Invalides.
that you've bought the perfect souvenir before you head home, there's a great place to eat at the Aérogare des Invalides.
This building was built in 1867 as a railway station to bring people to the Esplanade of Invalides to inspect temporary buildings set up for the Universal Exhibition of that year. These days, though, the building is used as a bus station where you can catch a bus to either airport. And before you head out to the airport, you might want a nice meal, and there just so happens to be a great restaurant in here. Restaurant Chez Françoise is very close to the corridors of power. It's right near the Assemblée Nationale and other government offices, and it's long been the favorite lunch spot for politicos. Now we're coming here for dinner when it's quieter and more intimate, but if I were the president of the French Republic, I would have my chauffeur drive me up here to the very discreet driveway, specially connected to Chez Françoise, out of sight from any of the press. And I would come here and have lunch with my cronies.
Would you like to know who cooks for the President of France? We'll talk to the chef right after this. In the political heart of Paris, stopping at the restaurant Chez Françoise, just steps from the French Parliament, l'Assemblée Nationale. Eating here, we dine surrounded by the political elite.
Chez Françoise was installed here as a restaurant in 1949, right when it was becoming fashionable to leave for the airport by bus from this Aérogare. So the idea was that you would come here, have an elegant meal. In fact, they used to announce the bus departures here during this beautiful restaurant meal. Now, the name Chez Françoise is a little romantic story because the man who ran the restaurant was in love with a woman whose second name was Françoise. Albertine Françoise is the reason this restaurant has the name. Now today, you might not get the bus announcements telling you when your bus is departing for the airport, but this is still a wonderful, intimate place to have a beautiful French meal before you head home again. I have decided what I'm going to order. I'm going to have today's wild fish recommendation because, of course, here for Chez Françoise, they come up with a special menu every day. And tonight, the fish special is a bar done in its own white butter sauce, and it's got green asparagus, the first of the season, so it's a very spring dish that I'm ordering.
Now I'm not meeting the President of the French Republic tonight, but I'm meeting the President of the Kitchen. Come backstage and meet Chef Philippe Leglise.
Bonjour Lisa.
Enchanté. Alors, ce soir, j'ai commandé le bar. So, Chef Philippe has just explained to me that because the green asparagus from Gascogne, which is a region in France, have just arrived, he decided to pair that with the bar, which is now in season, and he accompanied it with a white butter sauce, which is a beurre blanc, very traditional French cuisine style of sauce, but it's a very delicate one. It's not one of the heavier sauces, so it won't overwhelm these asparagus that are brand new and one of my favorite things. This time of year, the beginning of spring, is his favorite time, season-wise, to start preparing new menus because you suddenly have these new vegetables that start coming in, and that's actually a wonderful new palette for the chef to work with. That's actually really interesting. The tiny green rounds in the potato puree, the mashed potatoes they prepared with olive oil, is the ends of the asparagus that they've sliced. Oh, it looks beautiful. In a traditional French kitchen, every plate gets its own sauce. So here we have the sauce selection, which is really wonderful if you're a fan of French cuisine like I am. I mean, starting over here, we have BB, which stands for beurre blanc, which I'm having with my sauce. And then we move along to the sauce of the day, which is labeled jour. Then we have this sauce, which sounds amazing. It's sort of a creamy white wine sauce, and it's finished off with Nuit, the wine. Next up, there's is a mascarpone sauce, an Italian cheesy sauce that has truffles in it. I can only imagine what that one's like. And then further on, you have more of the meaty sauces over here that go on beef, more jus kind of style sauces. So each of these comes from a really distinct tradition in France and has hundreds of years of history associated with it.
Oh, merci, ça a l'air délicieux.
Un très bon appétit.
J'adore le bar et la sauce et les asperges. J'adore tout, en fait. Je viens d'essayer les pommes de terre, mais je pense que je vais adorer ça aussi.
Bon appétit.
Merci beaucoup.
That was a lovely day at Invalides. First with the center of military history and also the center of political power in Paris and in France. Let's see what we can get up to next time on Paris Next Stop.